Welcome to World History from 1500 to the present, the Introduction section. In his quite influential Histories of the Modern World, the environmental historian Robert Marx highlights four themes of modern world history. First, how and when do parts of the world first industrialize? Second, when is the emergence of nation-states as the principal means of political organization? Third, when and where is there an emergence of a wealth gap, perhaps between Europe and the rest of the world? And then fourth, why is there an emergence between the relationship between humans and the environment that is so contested? There are many ways to divide time. Frequently, historians, archaeologists, as well as biological scientists point to these divisions of time of historic and prehistoric time, especially pointing towards prehistoric time, where you have Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic eras, but then you also have, out of the Cenozoic, the emergence of the Pliocene, the Pleistocene, and the Holocene at the very top here of the image. Consequentially, however, we have this idea that there are humans who have a dramatic impact on the world around them right around 11,000 years ago. This has given rise to the concept of very specifically of the Anthropocene. Perhaps around 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago or so, when humans begin to have a really dramatic impact on the environment, and then moving forward, perhaps a Plantationocene, where there's a dramatic emergence of the capitalist-based economy, plantation-based economies around the world, which phenomenally shapes the environment in a way that is never seen before, but also dramatically increases pollution as well. It's important for us to think about these different concepts. The idea of the Anthropocene in particular is quite popular from the 1980s and the 1990s onward, where the idea has become essentially that humankind has become so large and so impactful and active that it now rivals some of the great forces of nature in its impact on the function of the Earth system. In the case of the Plantationocene, this is a much newer concept, but basically you have the idea that the Plantationocene emerges from right around 1600 onward, so during the period that we will be covering in much of this course. This all relates to the question of how we divide time. Do we divide it into the Holocene and the Anthropocene? It was really only in the 1980s that we begin to understand that El Nino and El Niño patterns changed and had something to do with dramatic climate shifts over time. It was really only in the 1990s that scientific communities and academics realized that the output of CO2 had a direct impact on climate change, and that impact was dramatic and potentially could be shifted if CO2 output was reduced. Of course, this would require some dramatic changes in global practices. The ultimate question here is, how does change impact our understanding of history? You might think about different types of changes. Robert Marx starts out his book challenging the idea of Eurocentrism, especially in the first two versions of his book that we will be reading in the early weeks of our course. Now, he's using it more as a global narrative of environment, and he's teaching a little bit more about environmental change in the newer versions of this. So the question becomes, are these shifts in approaches also indicative of new shifts in perhaps research generations that emerge? You might think about different schools of historians based on where they are trained. For example, you could have the Chicago School of Historians or the Wisconsin School of Historians. And then you might also ask, are there generational differences between the historical approaches? I'd like to close here by having you think about generations. We speak often about generations. Think about it. What generation are you? Are you a millennial, Gen Xer, Xennial, a Zoomer? What is a generation? How do generations function? Why do generations have an impact as such? Why is it that generations are considered a unit? Do generations actually exist? For your quick post here, I would like you to respond to just one of these questions. Pick one of the questions and then create a short response to that question. If somebody else has responded to the same question, you might just respond to their thread rather than generating a new thread. Again, these posts don't have to be very long, but I am curious in seeing what your responses are. That's it, and there will be more soon.